Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to the 12th episode of Season 3 of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown. This is the podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected to Tom along the way. Today's episode is another interview/conversation episode, and I'm joined today by a rhythm guitarist, a songwriter, a clinical pathologist, and a huge Tom Petty fan, Nic Apostoleris. I didn't edit this one down too much, as I think you'll enjoy our sort of rambling, extended discussion, and I won't keep you from it. So I'll see you at the end for a little announcement about next week's episode. Enjoy. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well.
Nice to meet you virtually.
Congratulations on this whole project. It is really cool.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, it was one of those things, I was sitting around and I was actually having a few beers and I thought, I was just shit posting on Facebook. I thought, I should do a podcast or something, because I had another music review podcast with a friend of mine and that was kind of on hiatus. So I thought, well, I'll go through the entire Tom Petty catalogue. And then it just kind of sat with me and I thought, actually, I think that is something I could do. And then once I sort of started planning and committed to it, then I sort of looked into the catalogue and I'm like, oh crap, this is like over 350 songs. What have I set myself up for?
Yeah, what is your time frame in terms of going through? Because you're actually getting pretty granular in terms of what you're looking at. You're not just superficially looking at it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? So it takes me probably I think it takes me about 2.5 hours to write an episode for a song. So that's including sort of doing a little bit of research and then again listening to it and as a musician, listen to the guitar part, listen to the bass, listen to the drums, listen to the vocals, and trying to pick those things apart so that you can really sort of drill down into, oh shit, I didn't realize that Ron Blair was doing that thing there in that little part, So yeah, one song per episode, and I think I've scheduled out, so just Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, so that's and I think with Mudcrutch as well. But that's not any of the B-sides, none of the sort of unreleased stuff or the Wilburys. That takes me to July 15th, 2026 is my timeline so far.
And you're keeping the enthusiasm, obviously. You're keeping the interest. Yeah.
Well, again, I think it's that thing I found really early on. What I sort of suspected was that, and again, as a musician, you do tend to listen to music a little bit differently to a layperson, maybe. In that it just gives you a huge appreciation, even more of an appreciation for the music, because, if you listen to the songs casually, they're great songs and you can tap your foot to them and you can sing along. But when you listen to, like a song like Fault Lines and you listen to that little bossa nova rhythm that Steve Ferrone's playing, it's just like, wow, I hadn't really noticed that so much before, So, yeah, it's super cool. I love it.
It's funny, you throw in the new guy there. Okay, so the new guy, sort of a session guy, but not really a session guy. He was premier. An average white band, incredibly tight. So here's the musician. He comes in for a gig following some other guys that are trying out, and TP looks at Mike and is like, no, not that. Yeah, that's what I've wanted, right? He's the man. Sure. But he's not even the star. He's a background player. Yeah. So the level of musicianship is just so high. And the commitment to playing together as a live band. Yeah. Forget about Jeff Lynne, but the other producers sort of understood that this was a magic live band. So they let them play. Yeah. And you just don't get that. It's amazing. It's like a peak period in rock and roll music. Peak period. Yeah.
For sure. And I think the essence of that, the thing that you're talking about there especially, is that, and capturing that live feel, is Mojo. Right, Ryan Oliata comes in and they do it in the clubhouse, and it's basically live off the floor with, obviously some overdubs, but my God, you talk about capturing a band the way they actually sound. And that's what I always want to hear on a record. It's same as, that's why I love Foo Fighters, and Dave Grohl always says, I want it to sound like us live. The record needs to sound like us. And I always get that with Tom, especially, again, those later albums I think are just a great example of that.
There is just something about, they started, you hear stories, well, you heard the Beatles, well, I can't do that. Heard the Stones say, well, I can do that. Right. And then, so this sort of Stones ethic with Keith of the intertwined, he calls it the weaving. Yeah. And he felt comfortable with Ronnie. Well, Ronnie's not the most proficient stretched. You know, he can't.
Yeah.
He's not a lead god, but he and Keith had a thing, so they could work together.
Yeah.
And you know, I think Tom Petty's underrated as a rhythm guitarist.
Oh.
How much there's interplay between Tom Petty and Mike. Mike is obviously a guitar god. But
Yeah.
Tom Petty set that whole thing up and allowed Mike to do everything. And Tom Petty was really a fantastic rhythm guitarist.
Yeah, and I think I've talked about that on a previous episode or two, even maybe, that it's one of the things that you don't realize if you don't sort of dig into the music, that Tom's writing those things and leaving spaces because he knows that Mike's going to do something kick-ass, right? And he's doing that very deliberately. Or he's playing something where he knows if I'm playing this part, Mike's going to play something, or he's going to play a counterpoint to it, or it's definitely going to be complementary, right? So, and the interplay between all of them, and Ron Blair and, you know, Lady Howe, it's the same thing. That everything's complementary and everything's very deliberate, which is what I love about that band. You know, never took themselves seriously, but took the music and the composition of the music very, very seriously.
That's a really good way to put it. Like, you'll say, okay, well, look at this progression, and you got 4 chords. Anybody with an acoustic guitar can play it. But no, you say that to Tom Petty. Some interviewer would go to him and go, yeah, well, it's kind of a simple song. And he'd give that wry look. Yeah, it's simple. Okay. Yeah. It's actually pretty complicated once you figure all the, you know, what's going on. There's simplicity in sort of in a superficial way, but then there's real musicianship underlying it all. 100%. And Mike is like this secret weapon. I know I'm kind of going off a little bit, but Mike was really a genius, but he didn't feel like he had to be the center of attention. So he would dial it all back, and these great melodic compositions that turned, you know, sort of a good song into like, wow. Yeah. But he didn't need to be the center. But Tom Petty knew what he meant. So he wrote around him, it seemed.
100%. And again, just you know, we always talk about Lennon and McCartney and Jagger and Richards and all those key sort of songwriting combos, and we don't talk about Tom and Mike very often in the same way, but they 100% were, because, you know, you sort of, well, everyone else in the band apart from Mike and Ben came and went, and you still managed to keep that ethos. But I think if you lose Mike Campbell out of that setup, I don't think someone can come in and do that part. No one else can come in and play off Tom the same way that Mike did, because they're perfect for each other. That symbiosis between the two it's just perfection, right? It's
perfection, and you think about them as solo records, right, Kevin? But they're not solo records, because it's that duo. You know, it's the captain and the co-captain there on the solo records.
Yeah, 100%.
So it's the solo is those two.
Yeah, and it's again the solo records. I think some people get hung up on those, or seem to get hung up on those. I know that obviously there was some tension in the band with Full Moon Fever, because it's like, well, why are you going off doing this? And it's sort of, I think it's more just, well, I want to, you know, as Tom explained, I just want to try working with a few other people just to see what that's like and see what it brings in. And I don't think even the Heartbreakers later on would have argued that what that did bring back to the Heartbreakers made them better, because Tom had these new influences and new experiences and working in different ways, and that just enriches you as a musician.
Yeah, it's totally right. It's sort of, I think of Mike as sort of underappreciated in the creative side of things. He's not just a guitar, you know, a lead guitar god, but he was really part of the creative process. Can you imagine those cassettes that he brought in? Oh. Where he might have had 20 ideas for songs and just gave them to Tom? And imagine the stuff that got thrown out.
And what would you give to hear them, you know?
I know.
Well, that's one of my sort of, if you know, my very bucket list sort of aspirational guest would be if I get to speak to Mike Campbell. It's one of the questions, you know, because I'd love to know if when he sort of formed the Dirty Knobs, did he go back and listen to some of those things and look for riffs and look for things that he could use again and pull out? Because some of those songs do have a sort of late 70s feel, maybe sort of a mid 80s feel. So you think, okay, well, he's obviously going to change them and make them more contemporary, but did he use anything? Did he go back? Because I think all musicians do. When you're writing a song, sometimes you think, oh man, what was that line I had kicking around and that other thing that I didn't record? Oh, there it is. Yeah, I can use that.
Something else. And then Benmont. So, you know, for me, the core of the band is a guitar band, but that's just because I'm a guitar guy.
Yeah.
So Benmont made it to me. He complimented the guitars. He kept it a guitar band. I don't know where this outtake was from, but he said something like, he got mad at Mike and Tom and said something like, "You're in the Blanket Hall of Fame, and you got a guitarist in the Hall of Fame. You should be playing your guitars a little harder here." So he knew it was a guitar band.
Yeah. Of course.
He was a virtuoso. He was a genius, right? Benmont.
Well, again, another guy. It's like John Paul Jones in Zeppelin, right? Like they're so talented, but they know just when to sit back. They know don't get in the way. But when it's time to rip it, well, Jesus, Benmont can boogie. Like that guy can play, right?
Oh, yeah.
But he knows that the songs. I think I was talking about. I can't remember which one it was. I think it might have been off the last album or off Down the Torpedoes. I think it's Century City, where there's so much going on. It's such a busy song guitar-wise. There's lots going on. It's very energetic and frenetic. So all Benmont has to do is just provide that texture. He's just playing full chords and he's not ripping them. But then in the spaces in between where the sort of the song drops off a little bit, then he puts those piano bits in. So he's saying, I'll just sit in the pocket and I'll just sit there and I'll just wait for my time and I won't muddy things and I'll just get in when I need to.
Well, that's a great band, right? That they're not vying. They're not vying with each other. They're complementing each other.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a peak. You get a peak, and that's like top performance. And these guys, the weird thing is, I go back and American Girl was, I think it was recorded on the American Bicentennial of July 1776, 1976, right? And then you think that was like when Jimmy Carter was president. Right? Jimmy Carter was president.
I think so.
Crazy. The cultural change between that and Hypnotic Eye.
Oh,
what went on in the world, and yet they're not just nailing it musically, but they're hearing the cultural. Their cultural. Tom is making statements about American culture that are relevant throughout that entire period.
But also not in a combative way. Like, Bono pisses a lot of people off in U2 because he's so sort of direct in what he's doing, where he could read the mood and he could sort of read the temperature of the room and not do it in such a way that it's not Rage Against the Machine. It's not a complete rebel song, but there's content in there that when you actually listen to it, what he's saying, the shifts in the music industry and Last DJ and some of those kinds of tracks, he's got a very good ear for cultural sort of references and contemporary life. So I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Yes. Hypnotic Eye, I think itself, I read somewhere that it has to do with all the cell phones.
Oh, really?
I read it. I don't remember the source, but that he was commenting on that the phone was essentially hypnotizing the crowd.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that makes
contextually
that makes some sense. Yeah.
I don't know where I read it, but it was something like, so he was like deconstructing the view of the crowd from the stage. It's like, in the beginning they were just all on him. Like there was that gig, I don't know when it was really early. It might have been 78 when he fell into the crowd,
right?
And he got like ripped up, very really visceral, and like the performer and the crowd, and it was a punk mood, and it was right there. And I remember he wrote that his mom got really scared for him, that he really got almost hurt. And then you fast forward and the crowd is taking selfies, and the crowd is talking, and the crowd's recording him, and you have this mediator. Of the phone, and it just feels it's sort of symbolic there, I think, of the cultural difference. But he was on it, of course.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about you, but that just onto that point, that drives me crazy at gigs when you see people who literally watch 2.5 hours through this little tiny screen. They're there. They're right there. I saw that I watched the Who came to Saskatoon 5 or 6 years ago, or 2 of them anyway, I guess. But and same thing. People watch. It's like Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend. They're right there in front of you. Just put your phone down. Surely it's never going to be as good when you watch it on your phone later. The sound's crap and it's too small and it's shaky. I don't know why you bother, but
I don't know, man. Some of the people, they want to save it instead of experience it.
Yeah.
And really, in the long run, we're all done for anyway. So you've got to experience every moment. And if you've got that possibility of a peak experience, you want to be in it. You don't want to be like middle of it.
Yeah, and I'm sure you must do it too. Like, when you the good thing about going to a gig is just watching one musician. You're just like, I want to see what he does there. What's he? That's how he's playing that. Okay, especially for drummers, right? Like a drummer, it's like, they switch into the ride. Okay, he's coming around. Okay, I can maybe try that now.
Yeah, when I was young, there was so much guesswork about what was going on. How was the guitarist playing this? What was the song like? Where on the fretboard was it? What is it? Or even what is the singer singing?
Yeah.
But with YouTube, you can look at that and you go back and you have 3 different versions of it. And says, holy cow, look at that. Well, that's using open, and there he's trying that. It's barred up, and
Yeah.
so the level of understanding of the music, I think now technically
Yeah.
is so much higher than when Tom Petty came out, when it was sort of like magical, and making the record was very magical.
Yeah, for sure.
And it just went out and did it. But nobody really, I mean, like when I was in bands back, we were just listening and just going note by note and like, what's that? How do you make that? And what's the fingering?
Yeah.
But the subtleties were lost. Like a lot of what Tom Petty does is chiming open strings.
Yeah.
And it might be, so some of his stuff, it doesn't work unless you're down on the neck and it's open strings, and you can keep, one note pinned and then you have open around it. It's just a certain sound that you have to watch him do it.
Yeah.
To say, oh, look at him, look at that. That's how he did it.
Well, Campbell's a master at that too. Here Comes My Girl. He's got that suspended bottom note. It never changes really through the whole chord progression, and it gives that sort of that clarity, and that it's an anchor for the whole chord progression. It's so clever. It's just a simple thing, but so clever.
Yes. Indeed.
So, talking about your sort of, you were in bands way back. So, whereabouts did you grow up, and what sort of
New York City area?
Okay. And what sort of influences were around? What was the music around your house when you were growing up?
Okay. Well, actually, my parents were both in the music business.
Okay.
So, and I want to give a plug to my late mom. She was, by all accounts, the first woman producer of a Broadway show. So,
no way.
She's an amazing woman. And my dad started a record distributorship right out of World War II, and wound up distributing Motown and Arista. So I was sort of in that milieu growing up, and all of our vacations were going to music conventions, and so I met all these people, and it took a lot of the maybe glamour away from it.
Yeah.
Right.
So you got to see behind the curtain.
Yeah, you got to see behind the curtain early on. I was like, wow, I don't really like that. And and my dad would say something like, it took him 20 takes to do that. He wasn't on the music side; he was on the business, on the distribution side. But sort of, what do you say? That there was everybody had clay feet. Okay. And then I saw the business try to pump everybody up, so that became somewhat aversive to me, like this whole star thing.
Yeah.
And seeing people do poorly with fame. So that was difficult seeing, and I learned a lot. Like, well, that's something I never want. I never want to be famous. That was like a life lesson.
Yeah. Early
on around the music business, that was sort of its own pursuit that generally did not lead to anything good.
Yeah. Well, it's the subject in Joe, right? Off Last DJ, and he's talking about a young girl with a guitar, and she gets to be famous, I get to be rich. And it's that thing of these days, you hear young people interviewed sometimes, and you say, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? I want to be famous. Okay, but what for? Like, what do you mean? You should want to be excellent at something and then become well known because of it. Not fame in itself should never be the end. And I don't think it ever was for Tom, right? Like he was never sort of, I want the limelight, I want this. No, I want to make the best music I can make consistently, day in, day out, and go and play songs in front of people.
Yeah, he was. I mean, this guy, he was a master observer of the human condition, and also of American pop culture, which I don't know if people from other cultures get just how immersed he was in the stuff, like TV stuff and popular movies, and a lot of his lines came from that, and he just took it and made it his own. It's not exactly on point, but when he's like, even good to be king. Well, I listened to Steve Ferroni talk about it. It's like, yeah, Tom, he had a certain confidence when he played it, but really it's, to my ear and hearing him talk about it, it was, the key line is there, is when dogs get wings, right?
Yes.
That's the line.
Yeah. So
he's saying, it's all this, but it's not me. I'll be king when dogs get wings. So he was always deconstructing and then looking at it, he knew he was a star. He liked success from what I've read. He appreciated the success. He was a boss.
Yeah.
He was a clear boss, and there was only one boss, and it was going to be him. And he was an individual. So he was going to be, this is what's interesting. He was an individual. He was a boss, but he was pro-social and pro-community both.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think when you talk about that, though, being a boss, he was very clear about what he wanted and what he expected out of himself and out of his band and out of the people around him, the management, right? So he never sort of compromised on his vision and his artistic vision to get him from point A to point B. But it was never sort of, well, I'm in charge because I'm Tom freaking Petty. It says, no, this is my thing, and I need it to be this way because that's what I see, and that's what I need to end up at, right?
But everybody recognized this was the man with the vision. This was the man with the plan, and they trusted him. I mean, didn't a couple of them? Well, Mike was going to go in the service, right? And Benmont was going to go to college.
Yeah.
And he talked to Benmont's dad, who was like a judge or something.
Yeah.
And he can have Benmont to go play. So he was very persuasive. He was this bigger than life personality, even as this sort of common looking kid.
Yeah.
With no education and no background. He was the guy. And it's just cool to see that he didn't take that and go to hurt others.
Yeah.
He tried to help others. But to me, he carried around an awful lot of pain. That he carried around a lot of pain that comes out in his music and comes out in every which way. And that's, not the fan side of it, but he was very damaged.
Of course, yeah. I mean, obviously, to the end, being the end, right? I mean, it's so sad, and I think, we only see the artists a lot of the time, especially if they're very private and they don't put themselves out there. So of course you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And I always get frustrated when you'll hear sometimes on the fan groups talking about, he really should have gone and got that hip sorted out, and he'd still be here, and it's blah blah blah. Well, yeah, but you don't know what was going on. You weren't there, and you can't really. And he doesn't owe us anything, for God's sakes. I mean, geez Louise, he's not given us enough. He's not left us with enough of a legacy that you need more. So. I find that frustrating sometimes, but so do you remember the first time you heard Tom, or the first sort of album that you bought, or what was your exposure to his music?
So I heard him on the radio before the first release. So the first release of the first album, this was like one of my early experiences, and that it didn't hit. So this has got to be like 76. So it hit in Britain, but it didn't hit in the United States. The first LP first. So I remember hearing this. It was like, wow, that's something. And then it came back like 18 months later. And back then, the cycle of singles was very fast. So something was going to hit. It had a normal curve. It was going up. As far as it's going to go up, it's going to come down. But it's all going to happen fast. And this one was not normal. So it was released, and it was like a very minor hit. It's probably American Girl. You heard it, and then it went away, but then it came back.
Well, thanks to John Scott, right? I mean, thank God for John Scott finding that album in that closet and just making it his life's mission to get this record played. So,
and in Great Britain.
Yeah. Well, and touring over there. I mean, I think it is. It's funny though too. I wonder whether some of that was, an American band coming over. It's always going to be a little bit more exotic than an American band playing in America, and it's the same thing. When English bands, you get the English invasion. Well, if those same bands had been American, I don't know if it would have had quite the same impact, because the cultures were different enough that, you've got some coming over, like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers coming over. No one's playing rock and roll quite like that in the UK at that time. Not really, right? Right. That's right. His genre back then, as the band was forming, it was like, I'm a psychologist, a clinical psychologist. So it was almost like a projective test. So you see in him what you want to see in him. If you wanted to see Southern rock in him, you'd see Southern rock. If you wanted to see, singer-songwriter, you'd pick that. You'd pick out whatever, Luna. If you wanted to see punk, you'd see punk, and you'd see his attitude as punk. So he was a slate that people could put up to what they wanted out of him. But he was a star no matter what the genre. He was the guy. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he knew Britain. To me, he wanted to be the Beatles.
He wanted that. He wanted to be the Beatles, the Stones, but he was also listening to American black music.
Yeah. No, I mean,
As a
there's that great quote where he talks about the realization for him was, when you watch, I don't know, Buddy Guy, or you watch BB King, well, I can't do that. That's just virtual, so I can't do that. But when you see the Beatles, all I need is three of my friends, and I can definitely do that, And it inspired so many people to pick up instruments and just form garage bands.
I don't remember the quote, Kevin, but I thought when he heard the Beatles, he was intimidated by them. And then when he heard the Stones, it was like, oh man, I can do that. I know I can do the Stones. The Beatles, man, those guys they're singing that harmony, and they've got these complicated things. The Beatles were aspirational, but the Stones were like, nah, man, I can do the Stones.
Well, again, you go back to sort of simplicity, and a lot of people think that what the Stones is doing is simple. Well, there's some pretty good stuff going on in those songs as well, right? So.
Oh man. So you did ask me sort of early influences, and with I think my earliest music, other than what my family was doing, a lot of Motown, but the band that I thought, like, I like that attitude. It was Keith Richard. Sticky Fingers.
Yeah.
And like turning that up, listening to both channels, and Can't You Hear Me Knocking, and feeling like the movement of the volume of air out of those speakers. And the echo on the second track is like, whoa, now that's powerful. That is powerful. He understands, like, the guitar is a percussion instrument. He gets how to have an opening riff that floors you. And it was that kind of period. And I think, this is Tom Petty project, but for Keith, my guess, because I did spend a lot of time thinking about his guitar, and that was my high school project, was on the Rolling Stones. So I graduated. I think when Mick Taylor came in, Keith wanted to show that he was a guy. He was a guitar guy.
Yep.
And he put together some amazing things, sort of as counterpoint to Mick Taylor's virtuosity.
Yep.
Different type of virtuosity for Keith. And I was like, holy man, he just knocked me out. So all those open G, 5-string, percussive openings, you listen to anything that I do, it's like, well, that's my holy grail. Is if I could be half as impactful as Keith, that's it. 'Cause he was it for me.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that, because I knew that obviously that you're a Stones fan, because I was listening to the album, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but on Lockdown Looking Up, I was like, well, that's a Keith Richards riff. You know what I mean? Like, it's just got that same swagger to it. It's chunky and it's driving. I was like, yeah, this dude's definitely a Keith Richards fan. So,
yeah, my goal in life was, if you would ever retire, for gosh sakes, maybe there'd be an opening, man. But
that's the dream for every musician.
And for everybody, for every kid, it's like, oh my gosh. So anyway, Keith got me into that sense of the power of what he didn't play.
Yeah.
It's
the jazz adage, right? It's the notes that you don't play are the ones that are important. So,
wow. And I'm like, so much, it's like, you can't say in the same breath. I'm just saying it's aspirational to kind of get that vibe that he came. He's total master. And then Mike is so lyrical, going back to Tom Petty. It's like, it was different because Mike reminded me a little bit more of Mick Taylor.
Yeah.
Right. Mick Taylor wasn't able to flourish in the limelight for as long, but Mick Taylor could have evolved into really a very lyrical, beautiful player.
Yeah.
But he didn't have his partner. Now, Tom Petty as a partner wanted Mike to thrive.
Yeah.
Keith wanted Keith to thrive.
And Keith did.
No offense.
No, and I hadn't really actually thought about that before, but they are very similar in the way that they're so melodic.
Yeah.
Like, they write very melodic parts, and they can do the rhythm stuff too, but they're so sort of, they know how to balance and move a melody along, so it never gets boring, but it's never erratic, but it's just so beautiful, right? So when did you start playing then? Like, obviously coming from a musical family, were instruments around the house, or was that something you sort of went off and did on your own, or?
I learned to play piano grudgingly as a kid. Didn't do well with it. I guess the only story with that was terrible, and I would only play when the teacher came. I saw the teacher, and then I said, this is a waste of everybody's time. So one summer, I like played piano like 2 hours a day, and then I saw the teacher the next fall, and she looked at me like she was going to fall off the bench. Like, who is this kid who's actually playing?
Yeah, but if you're playing for yourself, it's just totally different, right? It's 100% different. My daughter ended up a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic hit. She decided she didn't want to do piano lessons anymore. But in the last 12 months, she comes down now and she'll sit and play on the piano, and she remembers she can play by ear now, and she's got a ukulele and she's got her guitar, and so she'll sit and play. Once you get to that stage, once you're playing because you love playing, well then you're done for then, right? That's just a lifelong obsession after that.
And I was just oppositional. So if I was supposed to do something, I just wasn't going to do it. It's a waste, right? So then I got a $50 guitar and played it, and the action was like ridiculous, so I couldn't play it. And bless my father, he got me a nice guitar. He got me.
You still have your first like real guitar?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
He got me this SG.
Oh, beauty.
Remember, it's a beauty. Yeah, it's a Gibson SG 77. And that's what I play all the 5-string stuff on that pretty much. It's recorded. And he didn't, I don't know why he did it, but he kind of thought it would be good for me to go forward, and he did. So I'm very grateful for that.
So starting to play then and getting into sort of, obviously I'm assuming then Keith Richards and playing the Stones songs and those kinds of things. At what point did you ever sort of get to a point where you just sort of said, I'm going to get a bunch of high school buddies, or I'm going to get a bunch of friends and we're going to jam now and actually start playing together? So what was that what was that early progression like for you?
Yeah, there was a band at school that I brought my guitar, and there was like, this was a very academic school, Kevin, and people were studying really, really hard. And I started playing my guitar. Apparently it was too loud. I was playing my guitar too loud in the dorm. And the neighbor, he's a sweetheart of a guy. He came over, he goes, Nick, I like your playing, but it's coming through the electrical outlets, and it's like vibrating out, and it's too loud, man.
Yeah, man, I want it to be. That's the point.
And so that apparently got out. There was one band that was just forming and was looking for rhythm guitars called the Dead Bears. Okay. And we played for a while, had fun, and I learned from a really good lead guitarist, and sort of developed as a rhythm guitarist in that. Left school. My dad got sick. I left school to take care of him, and really didn't do much with music other than listen. Okay. For a real long time, listened a lot and played, but not for anybody. And then just more or less finding some local musicians to play with more recently, and realizing that I had a lot I wanted to do, and got into it late. And said, it's only for me, and I want to do it, and I've got songs and things I want to say, so I'm gonna have fun, and I'm gonna do it.
It's the best. It's the only reason to do it, really. And again, I've talked to people about this. I've got lots of friends who are musicians. Obviously, as when you're a musician, you tend to. I said, even if you don't go out and tour anymore, even if you don't go out and play anymore, you can't turn that tap off. If you're a songwriter, it sneaks up on you, and the line comes. And then when you get a line, it's like, I wonder if I could write a second line. Once you get a second line, maybe I've got a verse here. And then, or if you're just plinking away, it's like, that's a riff, that's something, I can use that. You can't turn that off, and I don't know that you could ever walk away from it, right?
Because I mentioned punk.
Yeah, go ahead.
Our band, we did only one Tom Petty song. We did Need to Know. And I listened to a tape of when we did it, and we did it at like, oh my gosh, it must have been like 170, beats per minute. It was so fast, and it was like totally punk, right? Yeah. It was just, we went at it like that, and you could with that song, and he had that element to him. But I was listening to Nobody's Children, that
Yep.
that collection, and Come On Down to My House. If
Yep.
you hear that one, it's in playback. So it's in disc 6 of playback,
Yep.
Nobody's Children one, and it's Come On Down to My House. And I'm pretty sure it was 1993 when he heard Nirvana.
Right.
And yeah, it's grunge, it's post-punk, whatever it is, but he was like, okay, we're gonna kick this one. Now, okay, Nirvana, what's Nirvana doing over there? That's wait a second.
Yeah.
Wait a second. So, and by that time he was sort of coming out of 91, 92, sort of a challenging period. Now the cool sound had changed. Now here's Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit, and he's like, okay, can we up-tempo this and really nail it? So that to me was like the thread within Tom Petty of trying to, come back to his punk, that element of punk roots.
Yeah, and just absorb things. It was never mimicked anyone else really. I mean, there was the bird sound on a few of the early songs, and there's little bits and pieces here where you take those elements in, but it was never mimicry. It was always said, okay, well, I like that part of that sound. I like this part of that sound. Now, how do I make it sound like the Heartbreakers? How do I now turn that around and put that out and make it my own? And he had a superb knack of doing that, I think. Because again, I mean, those things like, Don't Do Me Like That, or the songs where you could say there's got some influence from, I was listening to Don't Do Me Like That, and it reminded me of, not Fats Waller, Fats Domino. Just the way that Benmont's hitting the keys. It's like it's got a real sort of rhythm to it, but it doesn't sound like an old blues piano player because it's been sort of put through that lens of, well, how do the Heartbreakers sound? Well, they've got guitars for start, and there's a big ass drummer, so it's never going to sound exactly like its original source material, but just turning it around and spinning it. So I think that ability to absorb influences, even if it's someone like Nirvana, who comes years later and he's already been on the scene for so long, and it sounds on the face of it very different, but really, I mean, I always get hung up on subgenres. I mean, it's just rock and roll, man. It's like Lemmy said, right? Yes. We're all ripping off Chuck Berry. That's the end of it,
Yeah, that's for sure. And then that period of time when I hear that song, I think Stan, where that's what's, to my mind, that's what Stan wanted to do.
Yeah.
He was a hard-nosed rock drummer.
100%.
And Tom and Mike went into these different modes with Jeff and Jeff Lynne, that, Stan was like, let's get the band together and rock this joint.
Yeah.
Period. No, let's not layer one thing over the next, over the next, over the next. Everybody in a room, and I'm going to rock it, and live it's going to be great, and don't worry if I'm a little off on the recording because it's going to be great. That was like the Stan mentality.
100%.
Right? So when I hear that song, I think that's what Stan wanted to do. That's where the direction he wanted to go in.
And it didn't, because, like you said, it was Full Moon Fever, then Into the Great Wide Open, and then we started into Wallflower as well. Yeah, the timbre, even the tone of what Tom's writing about has changed now, and he's getting more cerebral, and he's getting a little bit more literary, and he's getting, so it's, the music's taken a more complex direction, right, in terms of sort of the quality and the variety of the songs he's writing. Whereas, like Damn the Torpedoes that I'm doing right now, that's just, apart from 2 songs, it's balls out rock and roll. Like, it's just,
it's crazy.
It hits you in the face every song after song. It's fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about Damn the Torpedoes then.
Yeah, great.
A little bit, so.
Oh, well, that's a masterpiece.
Yeah. So what are your highlights from the record? And if they're the obvious ones, I think, that's one thing that I sometimes think about Tom is, when we talk about the Stones, everyone loves Satisfaction, everyone loves Brown Sugar, everyone loves Wild Horses. The hits are the hits and everyone loves them. But the fans tend to want to listen to the deep cuts. That's the stuff that, and the same thing sometimes with Tom, but Refugee is such a brilliant song because it's a bloody brilliant song. It's a masterpiece of songwriting. It's a great riff. It's a great lyric. His vocal delivery is sensational. So I'm always sort of, I don't apologize for saying, well, one of my favorite songs is Free Falling, or one of my favorite songs is Refugee. Yeah. So I'll just sort of throw that over. So what would be your highlights from the album?
Yeah, when I look at it, Refugee, we chose not to play Refugee as band. It was too, well, not just ubiquitous, but it was too perfect. Yeah. And you can't, and they couldn't do it. What did it take them? 50 takes, 70 takes?
Yes.
to get it down.
Yeah.
That take, and it's probably, I don't know, it's got to be like 90% live. In terms of the takes were done simultaneously.
Yeah.
Not a lot of overdubbing. It was a magic take. So that's in like a different category. That's like a perfect song. Everybody knew that was a perfect song. You Tell Me from that album. I don't think that's heard that much. Probably deep track. But that one was telling me sort of where things were going a little bit. I was listening carefully.
Yeah.
To that. Shadow of a Doubt's fun. That Complex Kid. That's funny. Don't Do Me Like That. That phrase from his dad.
Yeah.
Which is funny in hindsight. That's an old song, but it's You Tell Me probably was the one that I thought. And then Century City, just from my background of the nonsense of the music business, and lawyers and everything, that was funny. But You Tell Me was like, oh, I'm listening to that. He's a different dude.
Well, and just it rocks so hard, that song, and what a way to close out side one of an album. And Tom talked about that. The sort of this track order was really important to them because the last song on side, because we're a vinyl age. That's what we grew up with, vinyl, right? So the last track on side one should make you want to jump off the couch, flip it over, and listen to side two right away. And that song does it absolutely perfectly. But You Tell Me, that's always one that it always kind of catches me off guard, and I always forget about it being on the album because you get so revved up with side one, but then you come into this now, it's not like a rocker. It's got that groove to it. Now you've got a real swing to it, and you get that great push into the chorus, and it's got those sort of elements. You think, oh, okay, and we're changing things up. It's a little palate cleanser in the middle, right?
Yeah, I'm playing it up here, and it does. I don't know if it's a little Motown or a little sax, but it's got a different groove to it. You could tell these musicians were serious musicians.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a perfect album, right? That's a perfect album. One thing I wonder, and you probably are talking to people that know everything about it, like it seems like the striving for perfection that happened with Ivy, created pressure that then Ron's gone, and then Stan is feeling put upon, and the pressure's built up. He breaks his hand not long after. So is it worth it? Because when you hear Refugee live, it still's great.
Yeah. Well,
when you hear his demos, they're great.
It's a good question. I mean, and I think Damn the Torpedoes is such an important album, not just for the Heartbreakers, but for rock and roll, because Iovine, Jimmy Iovine was so driven, and that was his first really sort of, this is entirely mine, and my name sort of is going to be made or broken really on this record, right? So he comes in and he wants everything perfect. So he makes Stan hit the snare drum 60, 70, 80 times. He makes him play a million takes, and Stan's getting pissed off with him. But I think what comes out the other end is an album that doesn't sound like anything else. I mean, and even just sonically, no one was recording drums like that back then. They're massive. They're so big on a lot of those tracks, right? Where that sort of changed the course of how rock and roll producers mic'd up the kits and sort of, well, what snare sounds do we use? Do we use an old jazz snare drum? Well, no, now we need a bigger surface area because we've got to get that Stan Lynch sound. And it changed, and so Kiss start copying that, and all these bands who predate the Heartbreakers start thinking, okay, we've got to do that now too. So I think that in some ways, I totally agree that they still sound great live. They still sound great if they're jamming them out. But that record, just sonically, it's so perfect. Like every single line to me is just spot on. It's exactly as it should be. So I think it's perfectly produced. So yeah. Well, what cost? Yeah. Well, you lose Stan, you lose Ron, right? But I mean, after Hard Promises, I guess. But you lose Ron, and you upset Stan. But I think Ron would have left anyway. Honestly, I think that Ron was at that stage in his life where he wasn't quite sure that he wanted to be on the road all the time, and I think he probably would have left anyway. Because that was his thing, right? He just didn't want to be away all the time. Where Tom wanted to tour, that was his life. He wanted to be on the road. So I don't know. I'm not too sure. It's an interesting question that we'll never know the answer to.
And I don't. And that's a totally non-professional question. I just think about all the pressure. Yeah. And then having to, beat it for the next album, and then having to beat it. It sort of set them into that music business front line when he was complicated. He wanted success. Yeah. He absolutely wanted success. Even as he was deconstructing it and playing fun of it, he wanted to be number one.
Yeah.
So, but it was just a big cost. So I don't know. They would have been great if they had just done that as a live album. They still would have been great. But I hear what you're saying. It's an epic accomplishment.
Yeah, it's just it's one of those slices of music history that it's like Zep 4, right? It's a cornerstone for everything that followed it. And so many artists based what they were doing on, again, the production techniques, the way that the drums sounded, the ways that those guitars were mixed, and so I think it's just a seminal work that I don't know that I would change it, but it's interesting. You were saying there, not a professional opinion, but I don't think you can ever really take that hat off, can you? Because you're always going to be analyzing things a little bit. So a question for you on that side of things.
Yeah.
I noticed that once Tom had gone through the divorce with Jane, and he meets Dana, it feels like it's almost like there's just this outpouring of happiness and love where the tone of the albums change. And even Last DJ, which is quite dark, is still... There's still joy in it. And then you go from Mojo onwards, and it's just like, it's this guy, he's a completely different human being.
Yeah. It's Last DJ is very optimistic in a way, because it is very optimistic. He's saying the Last DJ is a guy. It's an individual with autonomy to go his way. Yeah, he got thumbed out of it, but Tom is the Last DJ in some ways. He said, I can go my route. And we can do this, and we have to know what we lost in order to make something. And we can do it as a community. It's not one guy thumbing his nose at everybody else, and it's only me. So I thought it was a very constructive, positive album that was misconstrued by people that really were pretty jerky people anyway.
Right.
But I don't know, I don't know the whole... Obviously, you don't know the relationships and whatever, but as you look like foreshadowing these early albums and the complicated relationship and the pain and all that's in there, sort of foreboding of what's coming. And then he meets her, and then they weren't together. They're both married, I think, when he met her first, Dana. And then they got together. And it is like, it's like unicorns and rainbows. It's a beautiful thing. It's like this, the clouds part and the light comes down, and she's, she just seems to have done such amazing things for his appreciation of life. Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing to sort of see.
Yeah, and again, one of my favorite sort of stories about Dana is, she was listening to his music around the house. And he said, "No, we don't listen to that. We don't listen." Well, I do. I'm a Tom Petty fan. And sort of forced him to start listening to his old songs again. When he's like, "Oh, actually, that was quite good. Actually, that wasn't too bad of a song."
Well, shoot. I mean, what if it was Echo?
Oh,
well. Echo. Yeah. Now, Echo. I can listen to Echo 20 times in a row.
Yeah.
And I get blown away by Echo. Like in terms of the emotion from it, or the his view of the world, or just him as a person. Yeah, coming through Echo is the one that maybe is the biggest, knocks me flat the most. It's not the music of it, but it's like, what on earth is this guy experiencing? Yeah. And he puts it in words. And he didn't want to hear that. And they didn't want to play that. It's like you talk to the band members and you ask them about Echo, and they always go like, I don't want to talk about that.
That's the divorce record. Well, we don't talk about that.
No. Next question.
But I mean, what a record! And you've got Room at the Top on that record, which just, it's funny. Like I remember I think it was this summer just past. I was sitting out in the yard with my wife and having a couple of beers and listening to Tom Petty, and that song came on, and I just had this really sort of transcendent moment of sort of, sometimes you get connected with nature. I'm not a big hippie, but like you get those moments where you have that spiritual sort of thing, and I felt a lot of love. And I know that song's quite dark in a way, right? The lyric is, it's a dark song, but beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and we interpret songs, like you said, that he reflects what we want him to be, but so do the songs. And in that certain moment, the sun was beating down, it was beautiful, there were no mosquitoes for once, and I just had this sort of sense of peace up until the point where I love you, please love me. Up to that line, it's got a bit of sunlight in that song, I think. If you choose to interpret a certain way, right? So
what you do. But I mean, there's perseverance in that. He made it through. He's hurting, but he made it through it. And that is very powerful also. But oh my God, that song. You got to be in the right frame of mind to get deep into that song, because it's very intense. I don't have the right words to describe really that whole, and Echo itself.
Yeah.
I don't know if he ever did a full interview about what he was doing with the song Echo, and because it's a very interesting structure to it, and the lyrics are really interesting.
Yep.
I'd love to learn more about what he was trying to do with it. I don't think anybody really wanted to talk to him about that whole album, so I don't know if it's been explored as much.
Well, I think, in Paul Zollo's book, Conversation with Tom Petty, he does talk about it, but and whether that was Paul sort of editing that judiciously to keep some of that private life stuff out of it and just focus on the music. But he does touch on some of those themes, but really doesn't dig into them. And I think, it still was a bit too raw at that point.
Too raw. And
they didn't really play any of those songs live, really. I mean, Room at the Top now and again, and swinging sometimes. But most of the rest, they didn't turn up very often in the live set.
Yeah, so sometimes it's a little too hard. I never saw him in any of the videos that I saw. He never really choked up when he was singing a song. Did he?
I don't remember seeing that, no. And I think if the one that he would have done, I think would be Southern accents, right? That would be the one. If you could find one of him, that would be the one where it would be a little bit too much, right? So
yeah, like after his mom died.
Yeah,
he was doing Southern. Oh man, that song. All right, different. This guy is a different league, right? Yeah. Hey, he's just. That's why I'm so glad you're spending the mental energy to document this, because he deserves it as an artist. Besides the music, just his impact on art. But that song, there's so much, and there's American history in that. He went from being, and I remember back in the day, there was a time when being in the South, you could fly the Confederate flag, and it could mean, the racist history, which it was obviously and continues to be. There was a time probably in the 80s when it was a flag of rebelliousness rather than what it really was, which was a battle flag of the enslaver rebellion. It was a slavery flag. But there was a moment in American history in the South where that flag meant something a little bit different. And on that tour, he had the flag. Right? But he realized quickly, and he was like, no, not that. That's not what I'm talking about here. And he was very clear. So his evolution to understanding the social meaning, even though he said something like, I don't have a dog in this political fight. There's one line, I don't know if it was a Hypnotic Eye from that album. I don't know if I have a dog in this fight or something like that. He wasn't overtly political, but he understood racial injustice deeply. And he didn't want anything to do with that. And he wanted to go out on a limb away from that. And that probably alienated him from some potential fans.
I don't necessarily think he would care about that, right?
He wouldn't have given a darn.
Yeah, because it's that thing of, well, if that's what you think, I don't actually really need you on my side because you're not my people. So yeah, and people have said that online. In the sort of the Facebook groups, it's no politics. Like we don't talk about politics, and I totally agree. And religion, I agree with that. But then you'll get the odd comment every now and again. Oh, Tom wouldn't have thought that. And it's like, yeah, Tom was a small L liberal for sure. I mean, he had very liberal views, and then it comes through the music. Of course, it does. So. I did want to talk just a little bit about your music.
Thank you.
Because I enjoy, it's the Tom Petty Project podcast, and we're going to finish with our 10 questions, so we'll get back into it. But I do like exposing people to other music as well, and I know that you're a very diligent musician, and like you said, you're putting out more EPs, which is great news. But I just wanted to talk quickly then. Let's grab my notes here.
I'm a rhythm guitarist. Musician's a big word. I'm kind of a punk rhythm guitarist whose vocals aspire to be half as good as Keith Richards on Bad Night. So, but I want to be real. I want to be real about it. I want it to be honest music, not pretentious. I want it to be I want it to be straight, the straight deal.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Well, I mean, mission accomplished because you sound like you. And I think that you don't try and do Keith Richards. You know, I mean, Keith Richards' singing voices, that's a whole thing, a whole animal unto itself.
That is a whole other thing.
But you're not trying to rip off Tom Petty. You're not trying to do
No.
Bo Diddley. You know, so you yourself. And I think that's, again, once you, and maybe that comes from a little bit of older age, right? I'm the same.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try and sound like someone else. I'm going to try and sound like me. And if you don't like it, that's fine. I'm doing it for me anyway. If someone else does happen to like it, great. You know.
Yeah, it was really weird. Like, you know, it was funny. Like there are some songs that are kind of punk songs that come out of my back, and I was doing songs that I felt I hadn't heard before, like good hooks, really good riffs, hard hitting, no irony, no comedy, no BS, no auto tune, whatever it is, just straight out, but with a good song that had lyrics and was punchy. I was trying to do that. So some of them come out of that genre. Then there's some of these other songs, Kevin, I don't know what they are. People say, what type of song is that? I have no idea what type of song that is. Whatever that is. You know, you said, what was it, one of them, Lockdown, Looking Up? Or there are a few of those songs that I don't even know. So that I guess that's me, because I don't know what the heck they are.
But it's what comes out, right? And I think that's all you can do is document what comes out. I was talking to a guy, there's a band in Alberta called Punch Drunk Cabaret, and they're sort of a rockabilly, psychobilly type band. And I was talking to the lead singer from and the main songwriter for another podcast, and he said that he thinks that songwriting is you put an antenna up in the air, and whatever comes down, all it is your job to just let it get out. And so sometimes when those things come, I don't know what it is, but it came and I like the way it sounds. So, but I get some, there's like Low Down Grifter off the album. It's got so you get those first 3 tracks. They're very high energy and they've got that sort of punk garage rock sort of sensibility. And then we get Low Down Grifter, which is really sort of sleazy and gritty. And that one and Cardboard Box, they go back to, it's almost like that Alice in Chains, Nirvana, grungier feel, right? So that's where I get taken. So I like that sort of the switch up, and then you get Stand This Up, which is just a pure, again, punk energy just to finish the album. So I like that. You've got the energy up front. We get a little bit of a change of pace in the middle, because you don't want everything to be the same speed, which would be my slight criticism of some punk. And then we get that change of speed, but then we finish on a high, right? So,
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Nirvana, because and Alice in Chains. I mean, these are bands that I think met the standard for a shorter amount of time.
Yeah,
but very innovative, very very creative, a lot of energy, and just blew me away. Not at the time, I wasn't smart enough.
Right.
I mean, I didn't appreciate it at the time. I couldn't get it at the time. It took me a while for both of those bands to say, "Whoa."
Oh, it took me. Geez, I mean, 15 years to listen to Nirvana.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I was into indie back in, like, I used to listen to indie rock when they came out. I was in Britain, and Bon Jovi.
Yeah.
But so bands like I've written down. So the Pixies I quite like, because they'd sort of hit the British indie scene, and I know they obviously heavily influenced Nirvana. But then, so the song "Barriers to Entry" for the new album, it reminds me of bands like, and I don't know if you've ever heard of Ned's Atomic Dustbin or Populate Itself, or Wire. You must know Wire, the punk band Wire.
Yeah.
Have you heard? Yeah. So that Pink Flag, that first album release, it's got that sort of. They're 3-chord songs in a lot of ways. They're pretty straightforward 3-chord songs, but they've got like a real heart to them as well, where they're not just disposable throwaway songs. There's something there you think, I'm going to keep listening to that song because there's something in it that I really, really enjoy, and I want to find out exactly what it is,
Thanks. I think that pretty much comes out of British punk.
Right.
I loved it. I learned from it. I loved it when it got high energy. I was concerned that it was decadent, like it was not doing what it could do.
Right.
There wasn't enough energy in the songwriting, and that the lead guitars were often superfluous.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not a critic, but I just try to get it straight from a rhythm guitarist. There's one cut where I brought a friend in who's like a crazy lead guitarist, great guitarist on Tim Bent's like, just to try to change styles up.
Yeah.
But that's kind of you to pick that up. That I think those slower songs are heavily influenced by sort of 90s grunge, even though I didn't really feel it at the time. That's where a lot of it's probably coming from.
And so, because those two tracks reminded me a little bit more of the stuff off the Loved Ones album, the other album that you have on Bandcamp.
Oh, yeah,
And again,
that's not out yet.
No, but I was listening to them as as part of my prep for the podcast, and some of those songs again, you get into that first track, and is it Eleni or Eleni? Eleni and Ruby. They've got that sort of, they've got that kind of dark, that foreboding thing. But then again, you change it up and you go, Up and Over, which is guitar only. There's no drums on that track. Right. And I don't know if that's going to be remixed, but I love that. And then you go into, Leader's Hard Morning Blues, which is a total ZZ Top bluesy rock song. So again, I do like that variety, and I think it's got that through line though. They all sound like you because you've got a very distinctive voice where you don't really sound like anyone else, and that's a good thing. That's a really, really good thing, that unique sort of element to it. So I'm really looking forward to
that. Hey man, it's a good thing for the world that I don't sound like it.
So then
it's the voice, right? It's my voice.
Yeah. But I was going to ask you, the covers that are on that sort of within that set of songs. So there's some Stones in there, and there's five Tom Petty songs, and then What's the Frequency, Kenneth, by REM.
I did that with my sons. That was just a live. That was just something we did in the basement, and it's just for them to hear. One of my sons is a musician. He's a jazz composer.
Oh, okay.
He's won 3 Young Jazz Composer Awards from Lincoln Center. So he's a serious musician.
Holy moly!
He rebelled against my interest in crap music. So he became a jazz composer. Not Tom Petty, but some of the other things. Yeah. And I'm able to collaborate with Lucas on a couple things coming out. And I have on that Loved Ones collection, which is going to probably come out on vinyl probably early next year.
Oh, cool.
So there's a love song for my daughter, Eleni.
Yeah.
There's Worry in there. There's a song about my mom.
Yeah.
Ruby's Road is really about my mom's story. Okay. And Up and Over is about my son Leander and his. So those are loved ones. There's a lot of loved ones, sort of very, very in there. And with Petty, and I'm going to probably pull those off. Those are just my experiments with it, but I needed to get deeper into Tom Petty. I realized that was a source of real honesty and inspiration, and I did a few covers. Yeah, they're not meant to be real covers. They're just sort of experiments with it. But it was a real heavy thing. Yeah, the Room at the Top, Square One, it's heavy.
Well, your arrangement of Room at the Top is very different. It's what I like about Jake Thistle is he doesn't just do straight covers, because not anyone can do them, but so many bands have done them that there's only so many times you can hear a tribute act do Freefall, and it always sounds kind of the same. So when a musician takes a song and actually makes it fit their mood or their style, I always prefer listening to that, because it's like, okay, well, that's interesting. When Melissa Etheridge did Refugee, someone had posted on the Tom Petty Nation, and lots of people loved it, lots of people hated it, but I like that sort of, how do you make it fit you? I know how Tom sang it, sing it how you want to sing it. I think that's the best way to do that. And like I said, I really enjoyed Room at the Top. And the other one, Square One. Square One was great. I thought that was like,
really?
I really enjoyed that one.
I had no right doing those songs, man. But I appreciate it. I really kind of liked how they came out. Mm-hmm. Maybe you'd appreciate that Room at the Top. When Mike comes in with those crashing eighth notes, and I think I did it with a baritone guitar, like very soft, or a bass, to try to give a whole different feel to the song. So I did try to bring it to a different space a little bit and still honor the greatness of the song.
Absolutely, yeah. So this one comes out, and where can people? We should tell people quickly, where can they pick up the album, because it is on vinyl. So it's selling it exclusively through Bandcamp.
It is. You've been very kind in your comments about my music, and there's a little label in Canada, a DIY, mostly punk and hard rock label, and he took a liking to my music, and it was his idea. Let's put this out on vinyl and cassette, because his customers, his young customers, like cassettes and vinyl. And I'm like, seriously? I love it. Thank you, man. His name is John Page, and it's Wrecking Crew Records. And I want him to really have a success with this. So check out Wrecking Crew Records. Do it through him. I mean, you can look at my Bandcamp, and I have it there. But I'm really very grateful for John for liking my music and really kind of getting into it and believing in it. It's really nice feeling. It's very fun.
It's always a great feeling when someone tells you they like your music. And I always think about when you've got Tom Petty or these big acts where they're playing in front of 60,000 people and everyone is singing the words to a song that you wrote in your bathroom or something. How mind-blowing that must be, eh?
But how tough it is then to have to take out the garbage.
Yeah. Tom, the garbage needs to go in. All right, okay. It's funny because it's one of those things again. You know he did, but you can't imagine that. Well, it's the same thing with reading John Scott's book. When I got to the faxes, the idea of Tom Petty faxing someone, it's so funny to me because it's so random. And it's so flipping hilarious. I'd laugh my head off reading that section of the book. Oh, let's get.
He had to get through the day, man. And I know you got your question. It hurts me. Because he was showing hurt early on. So when you look at Hard Promises or all the Ivy stuff, you get senses that the man's hurting from early childhood. He's hurting.
Yeah.
And he's coming hurt. And I just, it hurts me when he went in a direction to sort of maybe do some self-medicating.
Yep.
And led in a bad or in a way that wasn't optimal for his well-being.
Yeah.
So it pulled me away from his music when I heard his sort of psychedelic stuff. I started pulling back from it during the time because I felt I wasn't feeling cool about it.
Well, I think it's that thing too of obviously in the profession that you're in, you've known this for decades, but the rest of the world's just catching up with the fact that it doesn't matter how much money you've got. It doesn't matter what the resources you have. Mental health affects everyone, and it's a really massive issue. And when it goes unchecked for too long, and especially when it starts so traumatically in childhood and it goes on for so long, it can become irreparable, right? It's really, really difficult to untangle all those wires once they've been knotted.
So it sometimes hurts to hear some of his songs.
Yeah.
And I don't, so he's touched me. I never met him. I never saw him in concert live.
Oh, okay.
So this is all pretty much saying, whoa, this guy's deep. And it's mostly in the last 3 years that I said he needs a deep dive. I need to do a deep dive on this guy because he's one of the most important people in American culture in my lifetime. And I need to understand what he went through and how he got where he was. So, yeah, I didn't understand. I was way behind the times. I didn't understand what a genius he was at the time.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've talked about this lots on my pod, and I think on the trailer too. It was about 6 years ago for me it was when I heard Wallflowers. It was like, what the hell is this? This is the guy that did Running Down a Dream, Won't Back Down, and all those sort of big radio hits. And then you get this Wildflowers album, which is just unlike anything else I'd ever heard, and still, I think, is the last truly perfect album that anyone's released. I can't really think of anyone who's bettered that album since, including Tom. And apart, I love Hypnotica. I think it's an amazing album. I love Mojo. I love all the albums that came after. But that album, he just caught lightning in a bottle on every single track. And I think Rick Rubin was a huge part of that. But that was my sort of Damascene moment to say, okay, same thing. Now I need to go listen to everything. I need to start from the first album. I need to listen to all of it. And then when you do that and you realize that, every album's great. And there's at least two or three...
It seems like Rick Rubin was just a really good influence. Does that seem to be true?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And again, there's another trilogy, right? So you've got Wildflowers, She's the One, and Echo. Again, that's 3 albums that are very cohesive. They've got a sort of a unified theme and a through line going through them, and that you can listen to them all, and so the songs are somewhat interchangeable between them. You could put a couple of songs from Echo onto Wildflowers very easily, and they would sit there quite comfortably,
He helped. Rubin helped.
Well, another genius. I mean, look at the albums that guy's produced. I mean, good lord. And he was young when he did Wildflowers. I think he was only 31, 32. You know, we sort of gloss over that in Tom was in his 40s. But so this young guy comes in who's a rap and hip hop guy, and he's going to come and work with Tom Petty, and you know.
But he had the ear. He had the ear.
Of course.
He understood.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump into some quick-fire questions.
Go.
Okay, so your first one, and again, it's always the worst question to ask any fan of any music. What is your favorite Tom Petty album? If you can only pick one to go to a desert island. Oh, no hesitation. Why is that? Why would you pick that one above, say, Wildflowers or Damn the Torpedoes or Hot Promises? Why Echo?
It's so raw. So, you know, you've listened to some of my music. It's pretty raw.
Yeah.
With Echo, it's just honest. There's no pretense, even the throwaway songs. But that's a human, sort of a connection to a beautiful human in great distress, who is not just laying it all out, but giving you hints about what's going on, and it just keeps drawing me in. So
it's that sort of emotional authenticity. That's the thing that sort of attracts you to it. Yeah, I can totally buy that. Yeah, for sure. Okay, Mudcrutch or Traveling Wilburys?
Mudcrutch.
Mudcrutch. Okay.
No question. I'm on bass.
Do you like the Wilburys? Because I know there are some Tom Petty fans who aren't huge fans of the Wilburys for some reason.
You know what I'm not a critic.
Right.
Because they're all brilliant. And Jeff Lynne is brilliant. But Jeff Lynne's style is not my style.
Right.
So Jeff Lynne is a very processed producer. And he layers. And I'm, single take, hum, hiss, put it down there. So Jeff Lynne's work isn't my particular favorite.
Right.
And so I think it's probably the Jeff Lynne influence that is brilliant, but not my cup of tea.
Totally fair. So question 3. If you could join, and we'll sort of assume that, you can go back in time or Tom's still with us or whatever, but if you could join the Heartbreakers on stage for one song, what would it be and what instrument would I think I know what instrument you'd play, or would you also sing?
I could not sing on stage with Tom Petty there on stage, no. And who's, Stan was a great backup singer.
Yeah.
He did great high harmonies.
Yep.
And he had to nail them. And, Howie was just a brilliant singer. So Benmont had his own voice, different from both of those. I felt Benmont, when he sang on stage, you could hear Benmont had a little different timbre to his voice. Yep. So maybe I could sing. I'd love to sing. What song would I want to do?
Yeah.
Strange Voice on the Telephone.
Yeah, I'm trying. The title's not coming to my mind now.
Yeah, that's what I've been playing.
Fooled Again.
Fooled Again. It would definitely be the one today. I just have, and I've been watching how he does that third chord in the progression. How Tom does it, and he doesn't do it the way I thought he did. So it's Fooled Again. Yeah. Well, and it's still in that genre of early songs hinting at complex, difficult relationships, trouble on the way. Fooled Again.
I'm pretty angry. That's a pretty angry song, and I love the way that he bends those vowels, like the way the intonation in the vocal delivery is phenomenal.
Got a little strange,
sneer. It's got that the R in the strange is really drawn out, and Okay, so number 4, who would, if you got to see Tom Petty in concert, who would be your dream opening act?
What era do you want?
Your choice, dealer's choice.
Okay. I would say that. How about Nirvana opening for Tom Petty?
I'm down with it.
Early Nirvana, like doing stuff before they hit.
Yeah.
That energy, and then watching sort of, are they taking anything from it? What's Stan doing? I mean, that would probably be at that moment, like right around 90, 91.
Yeah.
That would be a cool thing to see.
Hey, now what about that? What about Stan Lynch sitting in on a song with Nirvana? Now there's an idea.
He was a wild man. And of course, Dave would have been really interesting with the Heartbreakers. Dave Grohl would have been really interesting.
And he just didn't take the gig, right? Can you imagine? Like if because he turned him down. They offered him the gig after the Saturday Night Live performance, and Dave put the phone in and said, "I just told Tom Petty no. Have I done the right thing?" And all his friends were like, "You idiot! What are you doing?" But I don't know. But Steve Ferrone, for Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, I love Dave Grohl. I'm a huge Foo Fighters fan. I'm a big fan of his as a musician and as a drummer. But Steve Ferrone is he's just a class. He's in a different class for that band to me. Such an amazing drummer. So,
and a great guy. He also took away some of the drama.
Yes.
His smile. He's a beautiful man. Yeah. So he just smiles, big guy, and like everything's okay.
Yeah.
And there's none of this going back to Gainesville, hard, history with Stan, and everything got mellow. Everything got good. So he was a great addition.
It's great too. When you watch the documentary they just released, recently, the Somewhere You Feel Free. When you see Steve come in, he's just got that big beaming grin. You can feel the energy just change in the room. It's like, all right, this is going to be fantastic.
It's going to be fun, and it's going to be a great time. And he's brilliant, of course.
Okay, I think I know the answer to this question. Who is your favorite band member other than Tom? And again, I know it's a cruel question, and it's not to say that you don't like any of them, but
okay. Scott.
Ah, okay.
Scott is the most underappreciated member of that band. And if you ever have anybody who knows Scott, if you could please send my appreciation through that person to Scott Thurston, because I think he's amazing. He goes back to punk days.
Well, he's Iggy Pop's guitarist. I mean, the guy's for real, right? Oh, yeah.
Scott.
Yeah.
Again, great vocalist. Really important guitarist in the later years, and really, I thought he really was a great support for Mr. Petty in terms of helping him get through the last part of the career. So he was really an underappreciated and a multi-instrumentalist.
Oh, a sensational
I can't
musician.
say Mike, because Mike is like saying,
yeah,
Mike is perfect. So yeah, Mike is unbelievable. But I wanted just to plug Scott.
Hey, I'm a huge Scott Thurston fan. Absolutely. I mean, he's like you said, he plays everything. He'll back up Ben Mont if Ben Mont needs to play a fairly complex organ part, needs a piano, he'll play piano, or he'll play organ, or he'll play harmonica, and he'll do the vocals, and he'll play guitar, and he can play bass if he needs. Like, he's just a guy who can do anything.
Yeah, and he hits all the notes, and their voices sounded really good together.
Yeah, there's that great live version of Walls online when Tom's wearing the black polo neck. And Scott's backing vocals on that, they just blow me away. They're perfect.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He got very lucky, didn't he, when you think about that? Sort of always having, Stan was such a great high harmony guy, and then he had Howie, who was his vocal foil. Like that was another perfect marriage of two people who were in complete harmony, pun intended. And then he gets Scott Thurston to close out his career. So he's always had someone there who is a very, very good vocalist and complements his vocal style.
I don't know if it was I don't think it was an accident, because Mike was not going to be that guy, and Tom Petty was very demanding about the vocals. You couldn't miss notes in that band. So I think with Howie, that's how we got the gig.
Yeah,
probably with Scott too, is probably more on the vocals than on the instruments, because Tom Petty was precise.
Yep. And that's why Mike Campbell never had a mic on stage with the Heartbreakers, which is, and we all love Mike singing, but you've got to be able to nail it every single time, right? So, okay. If you could see any Tom Petty concert from history, which one would you go to?
Oh, man. There was a series they did in London that's on the Sirius. There was a series of concerts, London concerts from 1980, I believe. And I don't know how they recorded them so well and how tight the band was, but that was them sort of at peak live, to my mind. I heard that. The early phase, they're like different bands, so from 76 to 82, 83 is probably one version of the band. Then you got sort of the Southern Accents version of the band.
Yep.
Then you got the Dave going into that middle phase, and then you got the post-Steve stuff. But for that early stuff, probably the London 1980. I think it might have been March 1980. A couple of shows then.
Cool, man. Yeah, it's a good call. And again, you always think about I think I was talking to Dallas Hellicker, my first guest, about this. When I got into Tom Petty, when I was watching live videos, I was watching sort of later live videos. And he wasn't he wasn't careering around the stage much, but when you watch those early videos, man, he had energy on stage. He was a performer, brother. Like, he's got some energy, you know? Yeah.
That's probably it. And that's the punk side of it. He had pure, raw energy connecting with the audience, no pretense.
Yep.
He would, another thing, I know we got to go. This was so cool. I'm so thankful that you wanted to talk to me about it. I really appreciate it. But there's a concert that I saw on YouTube. Is it Live at the Whistleblower or something like that?
Old Grey Whistle Test?
No, there's something else. There's some other one. It was like an academic setting in England. And there was a heckler who didn't like one of the songs. And he said to the heckler, and they were going to play Luna, I think.
Yes.
That it's like, oh, it's not one of your macho songs. Here's one. So he was at this very early stage.
Yeah.
He was saying, I'm not your macho rock star here, and I'm not okay with that.
Yeah.
So
I know exactly which one you're talking about, because it's when
I don't know where it was, but you know what I'm talking about.
He turns around and he goes, "Shut up."
Shut up. I'm not going to play your one. I'm going to play this song. And if you think it's a girly song, well, then to heck with you.
Yeah. So cool. Okay. We've got 4 more questions left. So, Walls Circus or Walls number 3? Which is the better version for you, or which one do you prefer?
Number 3.
Excellent. You know what? It's been more people have said Circus, which really surprised me, because it's cool, and I love that Lindsey Buckingham's on there and everything. But Walls 3 to me is that's the way it was written. You know, that before the production, before getting in the studio, that's the way.
You could have predicted I was going to say that, probably.
I thought so. Yeah. Okay, if you could pick any artist to cover any Tom Petty song, who would it be, and what song would you like to hear them cover?
I would like to hear Stevie Wonder cover one of the deeper songs, like Room at the Top.
Whoa. That's a phenomenal call. Yeah, I love that. That would be so interesting to see what he would do, especially because, with that vocal, to see where he would take it. Yeah.
In his life experience, I mean, there's someone who can take that and do something with that. So that's my call.
That's a solid call, man. I love it. And unexpected too. So what song do you most frequently recommend to people who don't know Tom's music? If you're going to say, if they say, oh, well, what should I listen to? What song would you give them?
Well, their favorite was American, but I don't want to, it seemed like they loved that song, but that isn't really it for me. It would be something like Between Two Worlds. It would be one of these forgotten songs where he's staking out respect for other people and women, and sort of saying how he's struggling to come up with what's the right path in life. It's one of those sort of songs. I'm listening to that once. I'll go with Between Two Worlds.
Awesome, man. Yeah, that's a good call too. These are really good answers. I'm loving this. Okay, so last question in the quick fire round before we start wrapping things up is describe Tom Petty in 3 words.
A beautiful, beautiful, damaged man.
Well, any final thoughts? Like, is there anything you want to sort of tell people about what Tom Petty's music means to you, or sort of any recommended listening for people?
For me, it means not backing down doesn't mean that you have to reject caring for other people.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's a funny thing that, and obviously you guys have had 4 years of someone who thought that strength meant being the strongest person and bullying people, where strength actually doesn't mean that at all, and certainly not emotional strength. So I really like that as a coda to end on.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, I hope you enjoyed that. It was a genuine pleasure to talk to Nic, and I hope that one day I get to, like all my guests it seems so far, I hope that I get to sit down with him one day and talk about Petty over, into the wee hours over a beer or a bourbon or whatever Nic's drink of choice is. I'll post some links to Nic's music in the episode notes, so please go check that out, especially if you like sort of really authentic garage rock or punk. He was incredibly kind in sending me a vinyl copy of the album for the Times, which was released on the indie label Wrecking Crew Records based out of Eastern Canada, and it's even pressed onto this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful orange vinyl. So please go check out Nic's music. I think you'll enjoy it. Before I wrap things up, this is your weekly reminder that you can support humanitarian efforts in the Ukraine in many different ways. And I would urge you to do so if you have the means. I'll keep adding the link to the Red Cross donation site in the episode notes for the foreseeable future. So yeah, please, if you do have anything you can give at all, please consider that. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at the Tom Petty Project, and on Twitter at Tom Petty Project, and you can find me on YouTube, of course. So go follow, like, subscribe, and do all those things if you haven't already. A reminder again that the Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty Estate in any way. And when you're looking for Tom's music, please go to official channels. Try the YouTube channel first. And if you're looking for merchandise, please do go to tompetty.com and pick up official merchandise. Don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and the Tom Petty Fans Forever Facebook groups, as they're excellent fan communities and well worth hanging out in. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week with a surprise guest episode. I'm talking to a very special guest to wrap up the Damn the Torpedoes album. Bye-bye.